Hey, it's Trevor Grant from Revenue Hub. In today's video, we're joined by Alan O'Riordan of Apaleo. Alan is going to talk with us about how hotel technology can help drive recovery as we come through this crisis. He's going to be touching on some of the challenges faced when dealing with legacy systems, what new tech we should or could be considering going forward, and why now is a perfect time to evaluate and implement a new tech stack. Any links we reference in this discussion will be in the description below. And can I ask one favor? If you are new to this channel, would you please click on the subscribe button and also the notification bell? Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Roll the intro. Hey, so welcome to another Revenue Hub webcast. We are delighted to be joined by Alan O'Riordan, who is co-founder of Apaleo. Alan, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Trevor?
Yeah, very well. Considering all that's going on, but we seem to be seeing a little light at the end of the tunnel in some areas, so fingers crossed.
Let's hope so.
Seems
to be the case.
Absolutely. Now, we've got you on here today, not just obviously as one of our expert partners, and always good to have a chance to sit and chat with you guys, but you've recently produced a white paper called How Technology Can Drive Recovery. So we're going to dive into talking around the topics you cover in that white paper, and naturally we'll make sure any links are in the wordage that accompanies this webcast. But before we kick off, for anyone that isn't familiar with you and Apaleo, can you just give us a quick sort of intro? That would be great.
Sure. Well, I'm a co-founder of Apaleo. For my sins, I have now 21 years of PMS experience under my belt. More years than I care to admit, to be honest with you. But so Apaleo is actually the third PMS company that I've been with. Prior to that, 12-year stint with Hotel and a 7-year stint with Guestline.
Okay.
And I joined Apaleo in January. Sorry, no, but when did I join Apaleo? I was thinking about the month it was founded. I joined Apaleo in August 2018 as co-founder. And essentially, we are the world's most connectable PMS, primarily geared towards groups and chains, but we also have quite a few independent hotels on our books. And the reason I call us the most connectable PMS in the world is because of this approach or philosophy that we have, which is quite a technical approach, but it's called API first. Very long story short, it means that every single piece of logic or every single feature within our PMS is exposed through our APIs, because we focus on the API before we even develop the PMS, which makes us very, very connectable, whether you're a third-party PMS, third-party hospitality system vendor, or whether you're a hotelier that has the requisite skills to customize against our APIs, or whether you're a systems integrator sitting between the two. It does definitely give us an edge when it comes to allowing third parties to integrate to us, which of course, to translate that into a benefit for the hotelier, it means that they're not shackled by their PMS vendor in terms of having to pay crazy integration fees, wait for 9, 12, 24 months for the vendor to complete the integration with the third party, end up with a clunky half-baked interface. None of that is relevant when your API first integrations are free forever.
Yep.
And you can achieve a much, much deeper and more seamless integration off the back of it. So it's a proven model.
And I guess that leads us in quite nicely as to why, I mean, obviously, you've written the white paper, but I think having read through it, and without me being biased because you are an expert partner, you're not overtly just pushing Apaleo through the white paper. You're talking fundamentally, if I understood it correctly, where you're looking at how the legacy systems and then this new API, cloud-based, mobile accessible systems can actually be uniquely advantageous to hoteliers going forward. And there are a number of benefits that came out through that white paper that you've tended to tie into this particular difficult time. Your starting point is around the current tech landscape and some of the associated challenges. And I think you refer back to how legacy systems have come about and what are some of the restrictions within there. Do you want to just kind of give us a bit of an overview and a heads up of how you perceive that at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I hold my hand up and concede that, I was arguably part of the problem for 19 of my 21 years in the world of PMS. But it's not just PMS, and you were right to point that out, and thank you for pointing that out. I mean, certainly from our perspective, this is not the time to be aggressively selling towards hotels. The purpose of the white paper is to educate and to inform and to perhaps get people thinking about how now might be actually quite a good time to consider new tech, which will actually help hotels to recover better. And we certainly don't just focus on PMS in that context. But if we think about legacy systems generally, the hospitality industry has traditionally been quite slow to adapt new technology. And as a result of that, the industry is dominated by large legacy players in every category that we can imagine. I think the COVID-19 crisis has perhaps shone a light on that, and in some cases has revealed some restrictions or limitations that are imposed by that legacy architecture and legacy technology, which perhaps could have been overlooked in the past, but now is becoming more and more difficult to ignore.
Okay.
To give you one example, very, very simple example, remote access. I mean, right now hotels are mothballed, staff are furloughed, but there are still key exec teams that are in place and having to work from home typically.
Sure.
And in the case of certain legacy systems, they can't even actually access those systems remotely, which is a huge problem, right? So if we fast forward to cloud systems, of course, we're all used to anybody who uses a cloud system, whether it's for personal use as a consumer or for business, we know that we have instant access, right?
Yeah.
But if you have a legacy on-premise system installed on a server at the hotel, whilst there are still some ways that you can remotely access it, it is a little bit more clunky, and sometimes you can't for whatever reason. So that's one thing. I think also legacy systems, perhaps purely by virtue of the fact that they've been around so long, have gradually, it's probably not an industry secret, but legacy software vendors will build and build and build and attempt to provide more functionality around the peripheries of the core system and its initial use, and they will often be packaged as modules or optional bolt-ons, which you can then purchase, pay extra license fees for, pay service fees for, and pay ongoing support for. As an example, if I think about PMS, which is my world, many PMSs have a meeting and events module, which you would pay a license for. The thing about that is that that one-stop shop approach is great from a vendor. If you're happy with your vendor, it's great from a vendor support perspective. But where it does become difficult is if you need to scale down or scale up during times of crisis. So with COVID-19, in our case, for example, 52% of our hotels are still trading. But the fact that they're still trading doesn't necessarily mean they're trading across all departments. So it might be that they have some bedrooms that are still open, but they don't have their F&B department is shut down.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And with legacy systems, it can sometimes be hard to scale back. Also, in terms of being able to or having to reconfigure your core systems, which inevitably at a time like this you have to consider doing, from the really, really simple stuff like guest communications. You've got to start putting out messages of reassurance to your guests. If you are trading, or if you're planning to open back up again, you still probably want to communicate with your guests, and you want to be able to communicate the right message to them. Of course, your rate plans are going to need to be updated, because in many cases, non-refundable rates are probably not going to be too popular.
Yes, that's a good point.
With the uncertainty, so you have to start thinking about your policies. And all of these require changes in the core systems. And traditionally, some of the legacy vendors there's still a revenue earning model based around that. So you are, in some cases, not all, I will concede, but in some cases, you're dependent upon your legacy vendor to help you with that reconfiguration of your core systems to better reflect the message that you want to put out to your guests at the moment. It could also be room type recategorization, for example, that kind of stuff.
So just so I understand that. So if I was running a hotel and I had a legacy system, obviously they can be slightly different. But what you're saying is if I wanted to change, say, rate and cancellation, my rates, my cancellation policies, say my guest communication templates, maybe room type categorization, these may be things that I can't actually do myself through an interface with the system. I would have to get my system provider to actually do those for me?
It varies.
Yeah, sure.
As I said, I wouldn't want to
No,
pretend
no,
that that
no.
was 100% across the board, but in
Yeah,
certain cases with certain legacy systems, absolutely yes. And the one classic example would be if you have to change your room type configuration, because quite often that's a little, for the legacy systems, that's a little more complex because you need to have the assistance of the support desk of your PMS provider for that, because by changing the room system, the room types, that has a knock-on effect on the future reservations, which you might have not be fortunate enough to have any at the moment.
sure.
But it has a knock-on on other data within the system that needs a professional to take a look at, as an example. And quite often that's a chargeable service. Just having to rely on your vendor to do these things for you, whether there's a cost attached or not, is actually incredibly frustrating. Right?
I think that was the bit I was. I'm glad you touched on it, because you're right. We're not tarring every vendor, and there are incredible stories across the tech space of people opening out to the hotel sector to help
100%.
support them. So we're not trying to point fingers at anybody here. This is more just a general how the landscape has always been.
Correct.
And how it magnifies itself in these unprecedented times, and how that may present challenges going forward. But what we're saying here is that you will, if there are a legacy system at some point in time, if you want to change, if you want to configure, the point you're saying is just not having it in your control to be able to make those changes, having to rely on a third party, whether there is a cost or not, is historically how the market had looked. And it does lead us to thinking about opportunities and what opportunities new technologies bring that may not have been adopted.
Yeah, I think the obvious one there to focus in on is is all of the guest facing technology, because there's been a fair amount of buzz around guest facing technology, the digital guest journey, all that kind of stuff over recent years anyway. And to be fair, again, we have seen some uptake of that technology in hotels across all sectors, in fact. But I think that the general consensus appears to be that as we emerge from this crisis, even once our hotel doors are open for business again, that doesn't necessarily mean that guests are going to have the same expectation when they walk through that door.
Oh, that's a good point.
And if we think about the guest journey, they're already booking online. They're already perhaps getting pre-arrival emails online, but quite often still when they go to check in, they're still walking up to a reception desk and dealing with a human being.
Yep.
And if they're checking in at peak time, they're standing in a queue.
Yeah, yeah.
Now imagine, given the couple of months that we've just had and the few more months that we're likely to have before we emerge from this, imagine walking into a hotel and standing in a queue and then having to speak to the receptionist. I think a lot of guests are going to feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. So that would lend weight to the argument that we will see a heightened demand from guests for mobile check-in, for example.
Yeah.
If you think about the physical key or key card that has been handed to you, there's a hygiene issue there. So you're either going to have to reassure your guests that you have good hygiene practices.
Yeah, good point. Yep.
Or B, mobile key, which there's been a huge amount of talk about, but not so much uptake of just yet. Maybe now is the time for mobile key to really come into its own and demonstrate some value to hotels. Because if a guest knows that they can walk straight through the reception area to their room, having received some automated confirmation earlier in the day about their room number, and use their mobile phone to let themselves in, they're probably going to feel a little bit better about that.
Yeah, just a bit more confident, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just that reassurance, peace of mind, isn't it, in these times?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same applies to checkout. The same applies to in-room. There are quite a few people out there arguing that the days of the hotel directory are completely over, and that needs to be digitized now if it hasn't already been. Even remote controls for TV, stuff like that. So we'll have to see where that goes. Yeah. But I think the guest messaging as well, of course, rather than having to, as you pass through the reception on your way out for dinner, ask about a nice restaurant nearby. That might be something that you want to do via guest messaging platform. So I think we would expect to see an uptake in all of these solutions, and which will be driven by guest expectations. I think that's the key point there.
That makes sense. What do you think some of the areas that maybe were, everyone was talking about robots taking over the world, and there was kind of a bit of a hit and miss. And I think about a year, 18 months ago, there seemed to be a lot about robots in terms of room service and bits and pieces like this. But there's been picking up a little bit more around the sanitation area and maybe utilizing them for room delivery. A little bit more outside of left field, but what do you think about those areas?
You've got the conflict there, haven't you? You've got the conflict between being able to provide the guest with an experience that perhaps they will expect in a post-coronavirus landscape with that post-coronavirus mindset. But ultimately, you're still a hotelier and you're still providing a service, and the human element is very, very important. So I think we'll just have to see. But um, I guess it's probably safe to say that there will be more interest in that technology now.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. From a back office point of view, with the whole, the PMS, the CRM, the RMS, the POS integration. I mean, again, without touching back on the first point, talking around legacy system, but it just seems to me that that opportunity to be evaluating is probably a key trigger point more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think CRM is an interesting one, for example. I mean, historically, many hotels have kind of relied on their PMS to provide some CRM capability, which arguably has never been able to necessarily keep up with the capabilities of an industry agnostic CRM, as an example. And I think that as we emerge from this crisis, it's arguable that sales teams, for example, will really need to have a much stronger understanding of their guests and their customers, and they will need to be able to. The marketing team will need to be able to target in a much more defined way, and in a much more measured way, sending the right message to the right guest or company at the right time. And I think the era of dedicated CRMs might certainly see a little push in the right direction as a result of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were doing a podcast that we'll have coming out later this week with Dan Skodel at Sendai. And obviously his focus from his Rainmaker days and now with Sendai is around the RMS, but we were talking about the recovery and how the need to be segmenting at a far more granular level, particularly when you're looking at kind of local, regional, international, different business mix, the push onto the CRM and to be able to utilize that effectively for that granular analysis and then for developing the right communication to the right people at the right time, obviously becomes a far greater focus as you've got maybe a restrictions around your opening. So that need to be able to drive that right message, because if you can only release 40% of your room capacity, you're going to want to pick that up with maybe a lot more of your loyal local or regional guests, because if they can't be flying, then there's no point relying on anything that's going to require flight. So I think it's really becomes much more imperative.
Absolutely, and I think that's that single source of truth for your guest, that sort of 360-degree view of the guest, with data coming from all of your core systems, that will become increasingly important, because if you're only open with 30% of your rooms, for example, you might, and your F&B is still closed, you might not necessarily want to target that high spender who only ever came because of your amazing restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's probably not the best example in the world, but the only one I could think of off the top of my head.
That makes sense. So do you want to just touch around what do you think are some of the core areas as to why you feel it is such an advantageous time, or why we should be taking advantage of this time?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, the core premise is that decision makers in hotels and hotel groups are likely to have, more time now to dedicate to exercises like this than they would have done previously. As I said earlier, we've been through the process where we've had to handle an influx of numerous cancellations and refunds and all that kind of stuff. We've then had staff to deal with, in many cases furloughed, mothballed the hotel. And, what we're witnessing personally right now, it's absolutely happening at the moment, is that we've now reached the point where people are saying, okay, we can start to see some light at the end of the tunnel. We've passed the peak. The government is about to announce, certainly in the UK and in other countries, it's already been done, about to announce what their exit strategy is and the plan. So we need to turn our minds now towards some more proactive thinking. And one of the many things that hoteliers could choose to look at is their tech stack and whether or not they can review that, evaluate new solutions, and implement new technology ahead of the reopening of the hotels, or in time for the reopening of the hotels, to help them to deliver all of that stuff that we talked about earlier on. And I think the reason that that can be achieved now is, number one, as I mentioned, time, which means you can do a much more thorough evaluation of systems than perhaps you previously could have done. But in addition to that, you can do this remotely in a way that you couldn't have done in the past. The other thing really is that you can also take your evaluation to a greater degree than you could have done previously with tech. To give you some examples of that, you should, with most modern systems, be able to sign up for some sort of trial system that you then have full access to yourself. So you can have your team that is still active, evaluating the system to that level of granularity, if you like. It's not just a quick demo from a sales guy or girl, and then away you go on that basis.
Yeah, I think you were saying they kind of, you set up automatic test accounts or things, so you can actually get in and use it as if it was running live.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in Apaleo's case, for example, you can go to our website and you can sign up. It's a form with about 4 data entry points. And then 20 seconds later, you have your own dedicated, fully working demo system. If you've chosen to, it will also have 3 demo properties with reservations pre-populated, but you can still go ahead and build your own property in there as well.
Right.
But it's not just that. You can also, if you're interested in some of the peripheral solutions around the edges, for example, if you want to look at a new guest communication solution, with really good technology, you should be able to also trial that system, but also connect the 2 systems together. So that you can actually see a reservation in your PMS then going out and see how the email that goes out to the guest, and take it through the journey, see what the pre-arrival email looks like, see what the post-check-in email looks like, all that kind of stuff. And I think the really nice thing to think about here is the smartphone experience, right? So as consumers, we have iPhones or Android phones or whatever on our phone, and they come as a kind of a core phone that has a certain number of operation features that we would expect from a phone. But then we get to customize that phone exactly how we want. That technology is a given now in our personal lives. We don't even think about it, right? We download apps, we authenticate, and they start giving us restaurant recommendations or whatever, and we don't question it. We don't even think twice about it. But with business applications, traditionally we've been a little behind the curve on that stuff. But that technology is now available with modern cloud systems that use open APIs to connect to each other. As a hotelier, you can choose the third-party application that you want to trial, and you can connect it to your core system, typically the PMS, but not necessarily. And you can give it a try without ever having to engage your vendors or pay money. So that's quite a crucial thing that you can do as part of an evaluation now, without, even in times of lockdown when we're all sitting at home, you can do that kind of stuff. You can get to that level of granularity and evaluation. I think some other very relevant factors would be, for example, the fact that data migration has traditionally been a bit of an issue with changing systems.
Right.
So migrating data from your old system to your new. I mean, number one, that should be easier now anyway, because modern systems typically have much better ability to migrate the data that you need from your old system automatically. But where there's still a bit of a disconnect there, for example, the old system doesn't support the export of that data in the way that you need to, or whatever. In reality, if your hotel is empty, very unfortunately, I guess on the plus side, if you're looking at new tech, it means that your data rekeying efforts as part of a migration to a new system are absolutely not going to be quite the nightmare task or challenge that they have been. I mean, I always remember from my old days, people, that was always one of the biggest, the kind of this. I could see people's stomachs sinking as they just started to even think about those nightmare 2 or 3 weeks where they were going to be live loading reservations into the new system. That kind of stuff. So A, you shouldn't have to do it in the first place with modern systems, but B, if you do have some data rekeying, it's going to be minimal on that basis. And I think the other point that I would make is that, and this is perhaps moving forward a little bit from the point that you were making, Trevor, which is kind of like, you've made the decision and you're going to do this. You're then going to be bringing staff back into service.
Absolutely.
On furlough in an ideal world. And one of the other challenges, of course, with tech changes is that user resistance to change. And we all know it. We don't like to talk about it, but we know it. And as human beings, we are typically more resistant to change than we should be. But if this crisis hasn't taught us anything, it surely has taught us that we can adapt to change. We have to adapt to change. We have no choice in the matter. And I think that it's perhaps it's the best possible time to introduce staff to new technology when they're just coming back from a period of furlough and uncertainty. They've been, I hate to use the word, but they've been feeling vulnerable. They've been uncertain, but they've also been through this crisis that pretty much all of us in the world have been through together. And I think they're just inevitably, the psyche of the human being is going to be that they're going to come back and they're going to be much, much more open to, and perhaps even expecting that it's going to be a new world.
Could be different, yeah. So what are we changing? Yeah. They're not naive. They know you're going to have to adapt to the different. I hate the new phrase "new normal," but everyone uses it. But there is going to have to be a degree of adaptation when you go back and work in a hotel. Yeah, so you may as well use that to your advantage.
Yeah, and so I think that buy-in, you will get better buy-in from staff who are coming back from furlough. They'll understand the need for the new tech, and they will invest time and effort in it. And probably as you kind of gradually reopen and build your occupancy back up, they'll also be a little bit more relaxed about their day-to-day as well. So another good argument to consider the tech now, I would say.
No, that makes sense. And so looking at all of those pieces putting together, I think your kind of the final statement, or not statement's the wrong word, but a kind of a conclusion or thought to leave people with is that if they look at this opportunity, if hoteliers look at their tech stack, if they recognize there is a bit more time available, if they recognize that through this process of change, it might be an opportunity to bring about further change, knowing that people are realistic that it won't be the same when we come back. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of proffer a number of areas that if people use this opportunity, then really they could come out of this in a much leaner, more efficient, and better geared up, better equipped model going forward than they certainly would have been coming into it. And I think you highlighted, I mean, I guess it's really summarizing some of the bits that we've touched on, but there were some key areas that you identified in there. And I think the two that I first pulled out that obviously come out is that one, it's a cloud, there could be cloud-based systems which can be accessible anywhere on any platform. And then the second bit is around the API piece. But they were kind of underpinning of other benefits that you see come out through that model. So can you kind of highlight some of those other advantages as you see it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to touch on the cloud piece for it, it is fair to say that I get my fair share of RFPs across my desk from hotels and hotel groups looking at PMS. And over the last 5 years or so, increasingly you've seen on the list of requirements, cloud-based has kind of gradually crept to the very, very top. And it would be extremely...
Only gradually, goodness.
Well, yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, perhaps not so much, but it would be extremely rare now to see a requirements list that a hotel was putting together, even prior to COVID-19, to be fair, that didn't say cloud-based. But I think it really has accentuated the need for... if you're going to change your systems now, they just have to be cloud-based systems. They really do. I mean, there are some very, very rare exceptions to that where you could justify on property, but for business critical systems in all of the major categories, the move to the cloud is well underway. And if you're going to review systems now, it would be largely crazy not to consider anything else. That then typically tends to tie into an API approach, as we discussed earlier. And I think open APIs, without getting too tech about it, that's a really essential thing to make sure that your vendors support. Because long story short, that will give you the freedom to do so many things without relying on your vendor in a way that you have done historically. It will future-proof any integration requirements that you have in the future. It will ultimately allow you to be more flexible as a business and to innovate and to take advantage of new technology as it comes through. And it should also be a lot less costly. But off the back of those, then you have some other additional benefits, as you said, that you really need to kind of keep in mind. And again, I'm conscious of the fact that I don't want this to sound patronizing, because a lot of this is common sense.
Yep.
But I really do genuinely believe now that hoteliers should be looking, as long as it's the model that they would prefer to adopt, I think they should be able to expect zero capex.
Yeah.
On projects. You know, I've heard too many times, we'd love to change, but we can't because we don't have the budget for the capex. And traditionally, capex has been a software license fee one time, professional services built around that, as I mentioned earlier. You know, training.
Yeah, the training,
all that kind of stuff. And the reality is that with cloud-based systems, they should typically be running on a true software as a service model when it comes to pricing, which means they're charging a subscription fee per room per month. Typically, there are other variations on that, and that's really where the today's cloud vendor their commercial model would be based on that particular approach. And I think the other thing that is important to look for now is to find solutions that give you control over your own destiny, where you don't rely on the vendor for configuration changes.
Yeah.
You don't rely on the vendor and their resources and their lead time to do stuff that you need to do. And really, really good modern cloud-based systems are built to be much more self-managing than systems that are now prevalent in the industry, the legacy systems that are prevalent. Probably if you were to talk to our customers, other customers of comparable solutions, one of the things that they love most about using modern cloud systems is the amount of control that they have over their own destiny moving forward.
Yeah.
So that self-managing piece, don't be afraid of it. Don't think that I'm being left high and dry by a vendor who expects me to do everything by myself. I think we mirror the thinking of the modern vendors that I've been talking about. We have we have a kind of a remote customer success and onboarding team.
Yeah.
And those are absolutely crucial to our success, because, as we said earlier, if we're making it easier for customers to leave us if they're not happy with us by virtue of all of the technology and all of the features that we've discussed.
Yeah, that's a very critical point, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, the two go side by side. You can't really untangle them.
No.
You've got to provide that service level in order to keep your customers, because it's actually quite easy for them to change.
And I think two key points that also came out when I was looking at the summary bit was I think, and you've mentioned it a few times already, but it's that integration of other technology solutions. So as you spoke about with the legacy, the legacy provider would build these add-on modules, platforms like, I know, as you said, you stand out to the side of a number of others from an integration point of view, but applying that API ability to integrate different other tech solutions. If I wanted a meeting and event solution, there are probably a number of different providers of that. I don't need to be restricted to my legacy provider. I could have your core system and look at 2 or 3 other solutions, and I might try one out in much the same way. It maybe doesn't quite work or isn't quite as good, so I can drop that and integrate with another solution. So that flexibility of integration was one thing that I also felt was a real strong piece of flexibility for hoteliers going forward, that they could bolt on at a time that they need and drop off if they didn't need it. And then I think the second bit that probably ties in with that, and I know it does come down to how the developers work with you, but there are often native features that come through into a central dashboard. So, you can often see the core component elements, maybe of the meeting and event bundle or app that I integrate in with the Apaleo core system. There would be certain core features that would pull through into my dashboard. So I'm not having to go into 2 different areas to just manage that. And to me, from a productivity point of view and an ease of onboarding, they would also seem to be key factors that would be quite critical as well, key advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to address those 2 points first, if I start with the first one, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I had forgotten. We're seeing this move towards marketplaces now. So a lot of vendors, whether it's PMS or any other category, will have what they call a marketplace. In our case, we call it our app store. And these are shop fronts, if you like, to allow hoteliers who are using the core system of that vendor to then explore all of the different third-party solutions that integrate into that core system. So that makes life a lot easier in terms of researching. And of course, if you already have a preferred supplier that isn't in the store, because of the API approach, you can then encourage that vendor to go to the website of the core system that you're looking at and to explore their APIs. So that's all very important. And then to your second point with the integration, yeah, I mean, nowadays with the technology that's available, it is possible to take third-party screens and embed them into the workflow of the core system. So if I use PMS as the example, within a reservation, you might have your standard tabs for your reservation, your arrival, and your dates, your guest data, your folio, your invoice, your extras that you have on the booking, all of that kind of stuff. But then as third parties integration, as you select those third parties, by signing up for them, that embeds an additional tab into the reservation, which might have CRM data, for example.
Okay,
which might have, well, we talked recently about the gift voucher.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Integration, so that if that guest wants to redeem a gift card, you don't have to go to the gift card solution. You're still within the reservation within the PMS. And bizarrely, a really nice one that people like that we've done is a chauffeur service application,
okay, right,
which integrates directly into the reservation. So if a hotel of ours is using Apaleo and the chauffeur service solution, they're making a reservation for the guest, and then they say, "Would you like to book? Would you like us to book you a chauffeur or a taxi from the airport to the hotel?" And without leaving the PMS reservation, they can do that. They're actually doing that in the third-party system, but within the frame of the PMS reservation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
I haven't
absolutely
explained that very well, but
well, no, it much the same way. I mean, we don't like it much the same way. When I go on holiday and I look at Expedia or whatever, you know, they give you the various. Do you want this excursion? Do you want this transfer from the? So I can book my plane, book my hotel, book my transfer from the airport, book an excursion. I'm doing it all within one platform, but it then shoots off to the various different providers, and they handle the back end and any communication that might be necessary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you've raised an interesting point there, which I will very quickly cover, that if all of these different solutions that handle these different parts of the guest journey have open APIs, it becomes much, much easier to combine those into a guest-facing booking journey.
Oh, yeah, good
your
point.
website, for example, which historically for resorts, for example, has always been quite tricky to achieve.
Yeah.
You know, booking room, spa, restaurant, tennis, all in one process. To allow the guest to do that on the web has always been quite tricky.
Yeah, no, it's very good, very good. And I mean, you know, putting together a white paper is always a time-consuming exercise.
I think I underestimated
that. But I think, you know, having read it, I think it's been put together in a very unbiased way, which I think is credit to what you're trying to do in terms of the messaging to the market. You guys have always been happy to compete with other platforms out there. That's the nature of the business. And as you said, you live and die, as do your competitors, by the success of your tech, how intuitive it is, how easy it is to get up and running, and what support you provide. So, you know, again, reiterating it, we'll make sure that the links to Apaleo, but more importantly into the white paper as well, because it is a good read, will be included in any communication that supports this video and any articles that we put out. But I think to wrap it up, thanks so much. I know you are incredibly busy, even in these times. It's always good to sit and have the chance to talk with you, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this white paper today. Thanks so much.
No, and thanks very much, Trevor, for the opportunity.